So, what is the definition of the perfect marriage? Well, if you know me, you know that doesn't exist. So, we have to sometimes shatter ideals that can creep their way in and understand that perfect marriages cannot exist because perfect people do not exist. And the only people who are in a marriage are people. And so the question is more of, what does a good one look like? What does a good marriage look like? And the thing is, it's not even, sometimes we can think we are very good at evaluating those types of things. But you live long enough, you begin to realize that just because people look a certain way in public, that doesn't necessarily indicate what goes on behind closed doors. And so it's very easy to make those misjudgments when we're looking at and looking after other people. And so what we're looking at is how God views this. And one of the things we need to understand about Christianity is that God offers us a great deal of liberty in a number of different ways. When it comes to marriage, there are pillars, there's a structural framework that He wants us to live by. But a great portion of it is also the freedom to realize that people are different and that we have different personalities, we have different things that are important to us, and by that, I mean, what is your definition of a clean house? We can start a debate very quickly with that idea, okay? But see, there's freedom. There has to be give and take, and what would be good for one couple would not work for another one. And so what we need to do is pay attention to and make sure that we get the structural framework correct, and then allow for the liberty of the individuality of the people, and as they become one together and they build a mutual identity, that can be what it's supposed to be. And so I want us to think this morning about a blessed marriage, and this kind of plays off some of the things we've talked about even recently. I think maybe the beginning of July, we talked about one of the Beatitudes, but we spent some time thinking about the word translated blessed. Okay? There are two original terms that were used that are translated blessed in the New Testament. One of them is eulogeo, which is the idea of pronouncing a blessing on someone. We have a eulogy, it means to speak well of someone. So when we have a service for someone who has passed, we're speaking well of them and their life and their influence. Excuse me. And that's commonly how most people think of blessing. God's pronouncing a blessing on something. But the word that Jesus uses in the Beatitudes is a different term altogether. It's makarios, and it's the idea of holding up the ideal. And so if someone were to say, what does a good baseball player look like? Well, we might have someone in mind that we look at and say, look at him. Okay? So when Jesus is holding up, and when He's talking about the Beatitudes, these blessed are these individuals, what He's doing is saying, you want to see who God says lives the good life? Do you want to see who God says is flourishing, who is prospering? Look at that individual. The one who, and then insert all of the characteristics of the Beatitudes, that's the individual living the good life. Now, while these, obviously, Jesus did not utter these in the context of a marriage discussion, they certainly influence marriage discussions. You see, I used to make this huge mistake when I was preaching and teaching and studying marriage, and that was only restricting myself and my attention to passages that directly talked about marriage. The only problem is it ignores the entire undercurrent of what the Bible assumes about Christians and who they're supposed to be. And so you have to be able to not only, yes, talk about the text where God directly speaks of it, but you also have to see how all of these different characteristics, like the fruit of the Spirit, what do those things look like when they're manifested in marriage? And as we're going through this morning, when we look at the Beatitudes, yes, we're supposed to have these individually in direct relation and proportion to God, but also what do they look like when you practice them inside your relationships? And so they're not exclusive. And so if we try and box them in, we actually miss some of the most important things that help us. So what I want us to do is to walk through these Beatitudes together, and we'll try and give kind of a, for lack of a better term, marriage spin to them to kind of see how they operate together. So, as we begin, number one, Jesus says, as he begins the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So, in essence, if I were to summarize this for having a blessed marriage, it would be this: we need God. You want to see a couple who is really prospering the way that God would define prosperity? Both of them realize they need God. That's it. In this context, what we're dealing with, we're poor in spirit. We realize we're impoverished before God. Not unlike the Greeks, they had two words for poor. One was, you could pay your bills, but you weren't exactly getting ahead either. And the other was, you're poverty-stricken. You depend on other people for your livelihood completely. And that's the word that's used here by Jesus. We're solely dependent on Him. And our Christian faith informs us one of the reasons why we're so dependent on God is because we are lost in our sin. And the only hope that we have to be rescued from sin, Romans 3:23 and 24, is through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. That's the only hope we've got. And so when we come to it with that understanding, and that's essential when we get into marriage, because sometimes we can get the fairy tale idea that, and I'm not an anti-fairy tale, anti-stories to our kids. That's not the point. But it's very easy to read, and they lived happily ever after. But in real life, it's very hard to get that conclusion. You have to work incredibly hard. And part of that work involves realizing that you need God. Who is going to determine what is right and wrong in your relationship? How will you know which decision is the right decision and which one is the wrong decision? How will you know if you just simply have freedom to pick preference? The couple who lives a blessed marriage in God's eyes are, first of all, they live under the realization they need God. That if I try and do this on my own, it's just not going to go well. Okay? Number one, He invented it. He designed it. He knows best how it works. And so by looking to Him, consulting Him, and allowing Him to show me what I should be doing, that's going to lead us in a direction. If you can get both people with that mentality, we've got something we can work with. Okay? So, number two, a blessed marriage is one in which our faults bother us. In verse 4, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I take their mourning to be over things, over their own sinfulness, over their own shortcomings. In their relation to God. They realize they are broken, they're poor in spirit, they realize their whole dependence upon God, and their sin is something that bothers them. If in a marriage relationship we have two people who realize, number one, they need God because they are not perfect, because they do get things wrong. They not only sin against God, but they also sin against people. And the truth of the matter is, even, yes, you love your spouse desperately, but you still sin against them. If that still bothers us, that's a good thing. When it stops bothering us, that's the time to be concerned. Where we don't even allow our spouse to brush it off to the side, where we offer our apology for what we have done. And it's amazing. I have talked to married people who have honestly told me that they have never, in all the years they've been married, heard their spouse say to them, "I'm sorry." Never. How is that possible? How is that possible? Surely our doing wrong bothers us, and I still remember as a young unmarried preaching student, one of my professors talking to us about these very things. A lot of preaching marriages are less than fulfilling, I'll put it that way. And he was very passionate about making sure that did not happen to us. And he would talk to us very openly and very honestly about things, about one time when he had crossed a line and said something he knew he shouldn't have. And before he said it, he knew he shouldn't have said it. And he knew it was a low blow, but he went there anyway. And he said, "I went to apologize to her." And he said, before I could even finish, her first words to me were, "It's all right, don't worry about it." And he stopped her and said, "No, it is not all right. And it's never going to be all right for me to say that to you." You see what he's doing? He's holding himself to a godly standard that says there's no excuse for wrongdoing, even if I do it. And when I hurt you, that bothers me. Of all the people in the world, usually as Christian people, we don't want to hurt anyone, but especially not the person that we've pledged our lives to. And so we learn from our faults. They bother us. We learn from them. We spend time with God. We look at them. We try and improve them. We try and think how we can do better. We try to think of a number of different ways. But if you have two people who are willing to realize they need God and will let their faults actually still bother them to the point where they work at becoming better, they're never going to be perfect. That's never going to happen. But they're constantly trying. It's going to be a relationship that's actually very fulfilling. Number 3, we practice self-control. A blessed marriage practices self-control. Jesus said in chapter 5 and verse 5, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." The meekness, or even as Scott's translation read in the scripture reading, gentleness, that's the idea behind the word. Meekness is the idea of strength that is controlled. Okay? So there are a lot of people, I think about this maybe in a sports terminology, a sports analogy, and that is there are a lot of people, their talent is off the charts. Like their raw talent is off the charts. But they don't have the discipline and the coaching that it takes. And so all the talent that they have, they lose to less talented people all the time because they don't know how to channel the talent the right way. They don't know how to exert the talent. They don't know how to operate inside of the talent. And that's the way it is with power. A lot of people, they're powerful and they mow over people and they do all these things. And there's an exertion of power, so to speak. But it's really not that powerful because let me put it this way. The greatest exercise of strength is not in exerting it, but in restraining it. The greatest exercise or display of strength is not found in exerting it, but in restraining it. Anybody, for an example, anybody, if you do something they don't like, anybody can pop off. Anybody can throw their weight around and throw a fit. You don't believe me? Just say something to somebody. Watch a person who can look you square in the eyes as you do that and keep themselves in complete composure. You tell me which one is easier. when it comes to gentleness, when it comes to practicing this inside of a marriage relationship, practicing self-control, here's the reality, and I remember reading it years ago, and I've shared it before, so you probably remember, but, it just happens. And that is this. The question is, of all the people on the earth, who are you the most likely to end up hating? Your spouse. Because you know more about each other than anyone else. And if you use that information as ammunition against each other, you will do nothing but build resentment and hatred. To where the very sight, the notion of, you sit in a marriage counseling session, you set two people in chairs across from each other and say, look into each other's eyes for a minute. Won't do it. Can't do it. And just because we can say something in our marriage does not mean that we should. As a matter of fact, I would encourage us to not, especially if it's something in anger. And this notion that exists in our culture that says, well, look, if I'm thinking it, you're going to hear it. You can live that. Look, it's not like a police where we're going to run around and arrest people because they didn't do what is said. But at the end of the day, as Christian people, concerned with what God wants us to be and who He wants us to be, God has been pretty clear about people who simply speak their mind without restraint. He says they're fools. You don't say everything you think. Because we might be hopped up on emotion, and word has it that our emotions can lie to us. So we learn to exercise self-control. We can deal with difficulties, we can deal with disagreements, but we can do that under control. Number 4. A marriage is a blessed marriage when they say, we want to do the right thing. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. They just want to do the right thing. Whether that be the right thing in how they live, whether it be the right thing in their relationship, whether it be the right thing in raising their kids, or the right thing in how they interact with other people, they just want to do the right thing. And there are many people who, unfortunately, have zero concern for doing the right thing. They have equated in their mind their wants with the right thing. And so what happens is, if you don't do what I want, aka, let me translate it for you because I've conflated these two things together, then you're not doing the right thing. No. You're making a dangerous assumption that says what I think is the right thing. And that's not always true. I'm not going to say it's not. It can certainly be true that you can think correctly about something. But to assume it always is extremely dangerous. And so being concerned for doing the right thing, going the right way, handling it the right way, just being concerned with doing what is right. If you got two people who are concerned with that, as we've talked about many times before, if we are more concerned with what is right than we are with being right, the sky is the limit with what you can do with people like that. Because they don't feel the need to constantly defend themselves, they just feel the need to do the right thing. And if what they're doing is not the right thing, tell them. And they will adjust and do the right thing. They won't sit here and argue with you continuously knowing that they're wrong. So, am I, when we have a disagreement in our relationship, am I just going to prove my point and say, you're wrong on this, and I'm going to prove it to you finally, I'm going to stand my ground? Or Am I actually going to listen to what you're saying? Listen to what I'm saying? And we're going to try and figure out what is the right thing. And you know what? Sometimes in your relationship, you're going to be the person who has the right thing. And you've done the right thing, and you are saying the right thing, and your spouse is going to be the one in the wrong. It's going to happen. And other times, it's going to be right the opposite. And learning to handle each other with care in both of those scenarios is essential. Because if you're a person who's concerned with what's right and you realize you're wrong, it makes you sick at your stomach. But we simply, as a couple, want to do the right thing. Number 5, we are understanding and considerate of each other. Verse 7, blessed are the merciful. Now, I understand mercy, the idea behind the word itself, carries with it and is used, even in Matthew's gospel, when you study it, many times it's used in contexts of forgiveness. And it is certainly true, okay? You have the parable of the unmerciful servant in Matthew chapter 18. But there is actually a deeper rooted concept in mercy. Mercy will many times manifest itself in forgiveness, but the deepest portions of the concept are that you get out of your skin and you crawl into the skin of another person and you see the world through their eyes. You try and understand how they're seeing the world. Why do they feel this way? Why do you feel attacked? Why do you feel this insecurity? Why do you feel like my action was unloving? Just trying to understand. That's really the idea of being merciful. And this week when we were starting back classes, one of the things, Dr. Gallagher likes to try and be big and scary, and it's kind of funny. I just kind of sit in the corner and snicker a little bit because he's not that scary, but he tries to be. But anyway, he gets in there and he's talking to us about, and rightfully so, he's talking about the importance of learning how to interact with people with whom you disagree, learning how to read authors that you do not agree with, and learning how to parse through and sift through. And one of the things that every semester, every class he harps on, I could probably produce the speech for you if I had to. But if I want him to know that, I'll tell him that. But the idea is learning to be a gracious listener. And so one of the things that they say to us quite often is, when you write, or just in general, but especially when you write, this will directly affect your grade. When you write and you are presenting on a subject and you have all the different viewpoints that you are previewing before you explain the route that makes the most sense in your mind, you better write with such clarity and with such grace that if a person who held that view read what you wrote about him, he or she would say, yes, that's exactly what I believe. You better take that much care to understand what the other point of view is. And then he said this, and you know what, to be honest, this is really just a skill you need in life. If you can learn to listen to people and to literally see the world from their eyes and see where they're coming from, quit listening to respond and listen to understand. It'll be a blessing to your life. It'll be a blessing to every relationship. It'll be a blessing in your marriage. It'll be a blessing at work. It'll be a blessing at church. It will bless the world. Understanding, benefit of the doubt. In all honesty, I'm going to take a wild guess. Listen, I've seen some that go to a far extreme. But I'm going to say in most of them, your husband or your wife, they don't probably wake up in the morning and go, They kind of open their eyes and go, I wonder what I could do to make them really angry today. Maybe you do. I've met some that are pretty close. But on the whole, that's not what we're trying to do. Okay? So let's give each other a benefit of the doubt that says, maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe they just weren't thinking about it. A zillion different things could be going on. Just learning to be considerate and understanding. And again, all of these things, as with every sermon I ever talk about with marriage or parenting, I'm so afraid that lightning is going to strike. It's scary. Because we're talking about things and all of us are guilty of them. No one can really stand up over the others and say, "Ha, I got this one." Number 6 or whatever. We guard our hearts. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Serving God, we're going through this. We've been purified, we've been cleansed from our sins, but we're also going through this continual process called the Bible calls sanctification, where we're becoming more like God and we're ridding ourselves of sinful habits and different things. And so we're in this process of purifying our hearts. We're concerned with having a heart that is pure. And one of the things, one of the most valuable things that you and I possess, one of the most powerful things that you and I possess is an imagination. The human imagination is extremely powerful and influential. And it becomes very important that it be guarded and fed the things that are wholesome. And when we feed it things that are not wholesome, we end up doing something we shouldn't be doing. Okay? I can promise you this. No adulterous relationship ever started that did not first begin with one or both wondering in their mind what it would be like to be with the other person. Not one. They all begin that way. There's something in the imagination. And Proverbs, Solomon talks about this all the time, about guarding your eyes and guarding your mind, guarding your heart, because that's what produces what we do. And so in a relationship, look, and we have these, I don't have mine on me, we have these individualized things where we can sit in front of them and we can follow anyone we want to. And we can watch these short videos and short clips and short all types of things. We can fill our imaginations with all types of things. Or even with people that we know. We simply choose to have boundaries. You see, one of the things that purity culture, the idea that was really popular in the 20th century, purity culture was that it told people that if you wait till you get married, when you get married, you're never going to have a thought that is ever lustful ever again in your life. It's a lie. You will not cease to find other people to be attractive because you got married. People say, this is kind of uncomfortable. Well, try talking about it. It's not exactly the most comfortable thing in the world to talk about. But it's true. This is why Solomon counsels in Proverbs 5:15 through 23, be intoxicated with your spouse. If you put your focus, you put your attention on her or on him, and they become the standard, then no one else will ever measure up because they're not them. Yes, every one of these things are good, but they're to be handled and channeled in the proper way, and that begins with guarding our hearts. And not walking down a trail that doesn't need to be there. Next, we work through it. He says, blessed are the peacemakers. they'll be called the children of God. Whatever it is, we work through it. We work through it. We're going to figure it out. We want to live in harmony. Listen, here's the thing. Do you really want to go home every day and dread going home? Now look, in some situations, it may be out of your hands. You may have a spouse that refuses to do anything and to help and cooperate or to even try to improve. And in that case, we're in a different ballgame, okay? And we can deal with that. But on the whole, most people don't want to go home and dread going home. There's good news and there's bad news. You're in control of that. You're in control of that. And this whole notion that so many people take when they get in an argument in marriage, and they just walk, I'm done. I'm just walking away. I'm going to walk away. They throw around the divorce thread and they throw around all the other things that go along with it. No. No. That's a trump card, and all you're doing is pitching a fit because you can't win your argument. That's all you're doing. You're just throwing a trump card that you think is going to get them to acquiesce to you. That's all you're doing. We don't play that junk. But we also have to be willing to overlook certain things. I was watching an interesting interview of a husband and wife this week, and he's a pretty well-known individual, and he was interviewing his wife, and he's kind of a messy guy, not necessarily dirty, just messy. It's just that he's ADHD, he's got all different types of things, he's just different, okay? And people say, well, how did y'all work through that? She said, I finally had to realize that my home always wasn't going to be perfectly clean, and that was okay. Because you know what? This man, I don't know how he doesn't see that stuff piles up. But you know what? At the end of the day, if I have to choose between a man who lets some stuff pile up or maybe is a little messier than I would like, and a man who actually loves me and is there for me and there for our children, I'm going to choose to focus on that over the stuff that piles up. What happens in too many marriages is we lock horns and we say, no, you're going to do it my way, and we dig in instead of we're fighting battles. It's like raising kids. We fight battles over some of the stuff that don't need to be fought. Pick them and choose them. What's the important one? What's the important one? Making peace. And then the very last one, which they are persecuted. Look, if you try and do marriage God's way, there are going to be some people who, they've got their things to say, okay? Okay. I mean, you don't have to. Nobody's going to make you. So if you choose to be married God's way, which means I'm not going to go out. When I have a problem with my spouse, I'm actually going to go talk to them, not to my friends or to my parents about it. I'm going to go talk to them. You choose to do it God's way, there will be people who, they'll think you're crazy. But you know, I think there's a bigger principle here, and the bigger principle in my mind is that with persecution, Jesus says, the people who endure persecution, they just refuse to quit on Jesus. They don't care what it costs. They'll just do it. And I think that's the point. When it comes to our marriage relationships, You want to see a blessed marriage? Look at two people who, no matter what life throws at them, they say, we'll figure it out. We'll go through it. I don't care what happens. We'll figure it out. So when we think about what it means to embody this relationship, to take these characteristics that Jesus wants to characterize us and how we move them into other parts of our relationship, that we can build marriages that flourish. Not that you're never going to have a disagreement. Not having disagreements is not an indicator of a healthy marriage. Matter of fact, I think it might be an indicator of something else in a great deal of times. But can you work through? Can you live in harmony? And so, if we would live a blessed marriage, and by the way, if we're married, why in the world don't we want it to be the best it can be? Why settle for halfway? So, the question for us, people say, well, I'm not married. Okay, well, you may be, you may not be, I don't know. But ultimately, whenever you talk about marriage, the thing is that when you deal with it, you realize that when you're talking about it, the people who are listening to it, all of us who are trying to practice it, is that none of us get this right. But then you turn to Jesus, who has said himself to have a bride in the church. You remember this long discussion in Ephesians 5? Paul says, this is a profound mystery, but you know what I'm actually talking about? I'm actually talking about Christ in the church. That when we become Christians, we're part of the bride of Christ. We're married to someone who never gets it wrong. And if we'll come to him on his terms in a penitent faith, confessing him to be baptized in water for the forgiveness of our sins, or if we're struggling with something or we just need help, he's always going to be there. He's perfect in every way. We get to know what it means to live an extremely blessed life. And he'll help us. If we can help you this morning, we want to as we stand and sing this song.